Welcome to SHOWstudio and hello London Fashion Week, because it's our first broadcast from London about London, which is very exciting. And we're going to be talking about JW Anderson, who's kind of one of London's brightest stars and also a real great success story for us, obviously, because his brand has become such a big global success. But anyway, we'll talk about that in a minute. To kick things off, I'll let my wonderful set of panellists introduce themselves, starting with you, Stephen.
Hi, I'm Stephen Jones and I'm a milliner.
I'm Andrew Davis and I'm Creative Director of Roller Coaster magazine.
Maggie Norden, and I'm a broadcaster at London College of Fashion.
Matt Williams, and I'm Curator at the Institute of Contemporary Arts London.
I'm Lucy Moore and I'm Director of Claire de Rouen Books.
I want to start by saying how excited we must all be for London Fashion Week. How are we all feeling? Stephen, tell me what you've been up to, because you have a very busy time, don't you?
I've just come back from New York and it was crazy over there working on the Tom Brown show primarily.
Amazing hat.
Which was fantastic to work. It was the first time I've worked on women's, but it's great to be back in London, and I was over at Somerset House this morning. It was all very busy there, loads of people.
Is London one of those places that we all just feel really excited when it's Fashion Week? It seems to take over the whole city in a way that it doesn't perhaps in other cities. Have you been going out to the shows, Andrew? You look nervous.
No, I was getting excited because it was going to start. No, I've not been to anything yet, so I'm quite excited.
Okay, I want to start by talking a bit more about Jonathan, because as you said, it does look like the show's going to start quite soon. And I think what's interesting with Jonathan is every now and then a designer comes along who just does really well, really quickly. And we have so many brilliant talents in London, and everyone feels so sort of warmly about all the different designers we have here. But Jonathan, he just kind of has really exploded and done so well so quickly. Why?
My take on it is that he's a totally intelligent, considered aesthetic and forward thinking. So the menswear was tailored, but it was tailored for a new future. And this idea of a designer recognizing that we can free ourselves up and understanding also how to be playful, but very seriously thinking about how we wear our clothes. So the idea of borrowing from our fella or whoever it is and playfully working out how to construct in an intelligent way has shown other designers. Now, I'm not saying it hasn't happened before, but this has pushed the boundaries in a way. Certainly had students talking about it since he graduated. And I think when you see him interviewed, there's a real honesty there about textiles, about the art of construction. That's what I find impressive. And he understands branding. Yeah, definitely. It's very interesting that you talk about sort of an inspiration to students, because we should say, because obviously you teach at LCF, you're from LCF, and that he went to LCF, and I think it's interesting because I think he really has been a huge inspiration to lots of people from that college, and really I know that college has always been on the map, but made a point about how amazing that the menswear course there is, which is really exciting. Is he someone the students are a bit obsessed with at the college? I wouldn't say obsessed, but when they reference contemporary designers, he's coming out tops.
Yeah.
And I also think that what he's understood is how to look back and look to the east, look in a way that how am I actually wanting to wear a garment? And when I talk about a kind of simplicity in aesthetic, the students have really looked at his drawings and have looked at the way that he's using the cut and the pocket in a different place.
Here we go.
Well, you'll
That's
see
very
it now.
prompt, wasn't it?
Hats.
You're happy now.
And they're Noel Stewart hats as well, I happen to know.
And Noel Stewart is brilliant, isn't he? We love Noel Stewart. It's interesting what you were just saying there, Maggie, because I would like to talk about references, because I think one thing that's really interesting with Jonathan is, unlike a lot of his peers, he doesn't, to me, seem to draw that much on London's design or style history. It's more, as you said, on the East. And Lucy, what do you think of his work and the references that you see in there? Because I know you're always working around amazing fashion imagery at Claire de Rouen, so you must kind of...
I really love his clothes. I think there's definitely a Britishness to the references, but maybe it's a more, I see a lot of kind of essentialism in his, you know, and kind of acknowledging the history of like a certain material and its relationship to pattern or to kind of to reference or style or function. So I think he's more universal, I guess, in his approach to references.
That's interesting. You were nodding there, Matt. Do you agree?
Yeah, it seems very classic from the shapes, and there seems to be a kind of Japanese influence as well, I'd say. And but it's interesting use of materials. So, but yeah, very refined, very classic, I think. So.
Stephen, what about these hats?
Yeah, tell us
Great.
about the hats.
I don't know exactly what they're made out of. They look like maybe vacuum formed neoprene or something. I can't really see. It's a very, very smooth shape. But I love how they bounce and give movement as the girls walk along. I think the really interesting thing, amazing thing about him, you know, everybody talks about the creative designer and, you know, the money businessman or something. And I think it's really clever how he has actually combined the two, because he's got real commercial nous. And I think that's what makes him so now, and that's why he's so global, is that actually he does both things and is obviously doing them really well. And I think that's really unusual for most designers. You know, people tend to be more creative, or obviously business people. There's a collar.
Yeah, it's interesting when you said classic, Matt, because this show to me feels like a little bit of a departure, you know, even just with the nipped-in waist. It feels a lot more classic than what we're used to seeing. I'm going to say this in something very... Because you still see the Japanese elements that we saw last season.
Yeah.
He's very aware of the silhouette. I don't want to sound like I'm a designer, because I'm not. I'm from the media end of it. But it seems to me that while he was at college, I think this is kind of known now, he was also helping at Prada and was very much doing the window display. What we're seeing here is really so directional for me anyhow, because I think that the way he strips something and reassembles it, it's totally decorative, but in a functional way.
It's not too fussy, is it?
Well, I just think it's great fun. And your body is within that. I must say, this looks totally wearable, beautifully sensual for me.
Yeah, I feel like it's much more sensual than we're used to seeing. I think his stuff can feel quite sexual, but it doesn't often feel sort of flirtatious, whereas this feels a little bit more traditionally feminine, perhaps. You're nodding, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, that coat before dress that had a big lapel on it before looked almost Dior-like in its sort of new look silhouette.
Yeah, there's a lot of Dior-ness to this collection, definitely. Andrew, you're staying very quiet. What do you think?
I think he's reacting a lot to... He was heavily criticised last season for not making clothes that fit the woman's form and stuff, and I think he's showing that he can actually do that. But it's still as exciting as ever.
I think,
sorry, Stephen.
I think those trousers that we just saw before, I'm sure we'll see them again in a minute. It's quite interesting because they were sailors' trousers which opened in the front like that. Yeah. But did you notice they opened on the back?
Yeah. But that's what his work is always very cheeky, pardon the pun.
Go girl.
But it's very fetishy, isn't it? You know, it's very, he's quite, and I think that's, to me, that's where the Britishness comes in.
I met someone who said, I find it quite terrifying watching his shows. And I said, really? He said, yes, they're quite scary. And I said, well, tell me more. And this was a student, actually. He said, well, he's kind of talking about the real world we live in, and he kind of slashes and he tears. I find it quite aggressive. And I said, no, I don't think he wants you to take that. But I do think he's fearless. And I think, in a sense, what we're seeing here is reframing of parts of fashion we've seen before, but not in this way. So the texture on that, the way he's playing with the line of it, is very modern and directional.
I think it's interesting what you say about things we've seen before, because I do think, and I don't mean this to suggest that he kind of copies things, but I think he's very good at referencing and putting things, and he has been criticised for doing that too literally, but I think he is very, very good at taking elements from lots of different places and kind of remixing them.
But this is character, isn't it? I mean, I think it's also important he understands telling stories. And I have no idea, we haven't had any press information on this, what the title is. Have you?
No, he doesn't do press releases anymore. He stopped doing them, which I think is quite smart.
Yeah. Well, lady with a hat on, lady with a hat off.
It's funny, it's hat and gloves and handbag.
Yeah.
Have they sported the handbag yet?
Yeah, he's done a few accessories.
And sells them very well.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. We should talk about his appointment at Loewe because we're going to see, obviously, the first Womenswear show for Loewe, and the men's show was fantastic. Did you like it, Andrew?
Yeah.
Because you went to see the presentation, didn't you?
It felt like this really great artisan kind of wardrobe.
Yeah.
It was kind of referenced like 20s Riviera menswear and stuff, but the techniques that we used just felt really well put together and very special compared to what you would consider Loewe menswear to
Yeah.
be.
And do we think that one thing that I find exciting about that appointment is while he's also had the cash injection into his own label, you do think that's going to give him even more chance to kind of make his own label slightly more playful, slightly more adventurous, because he's got this kind of solid, safe position at Loewe. Do we like what we saw then? It gave us lots of food for thought. I think it was very interesting what you said about the reaction to last season.
It's great. He's reacted to everyone and he's given you clothes, which is great. It's clothes that women can wear, but for me as a stylist, there's great things that are going to look great on a page there.
What were the looks that stood out to you?
I like the beginning of it. I thought that was very kind of like seamless. Often they try and do something quite normal and it builds up, but I think he just went for it straight away, which I quite like, that directness that he has with his approach and stuff.
I think he also wasn't giving us what we were expecting.
No,
where were the ruffles?
Yeah.
Where was the tie? I liked it enormously. I thought that he's shown some really interesting subtlety here. Not that I've ever found him unsubtle, but I think this is something that would be really interesting to wear as well.
But I think there's an odd mix of subtlety, but also stuff that's very obvious, like a sailor reference. You know, that's a really obvious reference, and he's done it in the collars and in the piping and in the trousers. But he's done it in this kind of twisted way, and I think that makes it quite fun in a way.
Would you know it was him if you'd seen it without knowing?
Certain looks, no, you wouldn't, I don't think. What's your take on it, Lucy? You look perplexed by it.
I'm not. I don't like it as much as some of his previous collections. Just because I do feel like the clothes are slightly less challenging. I guess my favourite piece is the kind of extended tie, giant tie set, and that great coat with its double ruffle. But I don't know. The mood's a bit too retro for me.
Too retro.
Yeah.
Do you prefer it when he is slightly more futuristic?
Yeah, definitely. And also, I was thinking in terms of the wearability of the clothes. I've got this dress from a couple of seasons ago that I wore. I just wore it last week, and it's got these. It's really interesting to wear because it's got these quite big shoulders that kind of, when you first put it on, you read it just in a really simplistic way. Like it feels quite kind of space agey, and it feels almost too much. But then as you wear it through the day, it's softer, and there's something different, and it's kind of challenging but really interesting. But I just feel, and so I don't know. My experience is that maybe what looks unwearable actually is over. I don't know. I love the hat. It's so great.
Yeah, I think the hat's fantastic.
And the kind of reverse. It's got these different moods from the front and the back, which is really nice.
Do you know how the link with Noel came about? Have you spoken to Noel about it?
Oh, no, of course I didn't. No, I don't know exactly, but they are sort of kindred spirits in a way, because I think it's quite interesting you're talking about historicism, because there's essentially sort of a corset in there.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's gloves, and there's handbags, and there's hat. But, you know, they're all very modernist versions of those things. So there is it is rooted, and lingerie as well. So it is rooted in that sort of tradition, but a very modern version of it. And that's exactly what Noel does as well. So the mindset's really sort of similar. But I think that, yes, it is quite a commercial collection, but that's what why he's very clever, because he adjusts what he's doing to his clients, and what the market wants. And these are, you know, we all know there's a huge difference between what's runway and then what's editorial and then what's real life. But it's actually quite an interesting route to take, to say, well, those are all going to be the same things. I'm not going to do anything which is just for the runway, because this is what I believe women should be wearing. I mean, not every designer thinks like that, not at all.
And I think it's interesting what you say there, because also if you think the younger shopper who absolutely loves his work, they can buy into him with the great t-shirts with the lovely sort of nautical logo and stuff. And perhaps I think in a way, if he wants to be a high fashion brand, there has to be an element where women who have the means to buy the collection can buy it, which I think this appeals more to a slightly older shopper, whereas some of the stuff he's done before has perhaps been a little bit more difficult.
Well, I think, you know, we're talking about high fashion clothes. No matter what label it is, high fashion clothes are bought by older women because they're the ones who've got the money. If you're 20, you haven't, unless you're buying more like a sports label or whatever. Like I mean, in this crazy fashion world that we live in, we think, yes, £600 for a t-shirt is acceptable, but out in the real world,
it's
you know.
Not. Yeah. I do think it's interesting, this idea of playing with the codes of femininity and the traditional codes, like you said, the corset and the hat and the gloves, because I think to me that's something he's always done really well, is take sort of pillars of dressing, whether it's uniform or what have you, and kind of subverting it. And that feels like something, a really interesting sort of undertone to this collection, where the subversiveness comes in.
I think he's got more European, and I think he's got a different story going on there, at a time when the ambiguity in clothes is now a story, and people are actually marketing it to get that unisex take buy-in. He's moving on, and I think that it's the right time also. It's sad if we can't say, oh, you know, we can't see that concept being played with now. I think it's in there, but I think he's definitely evolved.
I want to talk also about the way he works in kind of cross-disciplinary manner, because he's got some wide-ranging interests. You know, he has stuff like he's into Bloomsbury work, he works a lot with I think his relationships with other creatives are very, very important to him. So, you know, Benjamin Bruno, who does his styling, he really sort of, they work incredibly closely together. But also Jamie Hawksworth, who shoots a lot of his campaigns, well, not the campaigns, the lookbooks, and the wonderful book he did for Loewe, and some of the campaigns actually for his own label, not Loewe. They've got this really close relationship, and I'm interested in that kind of art, fashion, photography, styling relationship, and how that's something that we have so much as a London thing. Yes,
I think it's actually more prevalent in more designers than ever before, because if you're playing with the screen, and if you're actually interested in film, you're coming from references, and there's a lot of people coming from art history into fashion, more and more in fact. Architecture, making the shoes for fashion. So I think that the styling element, I always call it collaboration, because I think that his studio seems to be a fantastic atmosphere of allowing people to add, and he's saying, well, as long as it's this core story. I think the art direction, styling, go to any of the photography exhibitions on at the moment, you're making something that is stand out in a very crowded, competitive world at the moment. So I think that I would agree, but I don't think it's just the stylist story. I think people are understanding lighting, sequence, narrative, more and more.
Matt, you were nodding there, that's kind of your forte, isn't it? This kind of...
Oh, I don't know about that, but no, it's a confident branding exercise. It's got a strong identity, and you know, you do kind of, you recognise it, which is, you know, you see so much advertising in magazines and editorials, and it's difficult to kind of to be discerning about who it is or who's in charge of that. But yeah, it definitely feels very considered and very engaging as well. So yeah, full marks for that. And the branding, as you say, is really good at branding. And you know, J.W. Anderson kind of rolls off the tongue. It's a familiar name. It's like it could be a close family friend, you know. So it's yeah.
Let's talk a bit more about that kind of, because one thing that I find so endlessly interesting about the ICA is there is this kind of there's so much exciting fashion stuff that happens there, and I think it's a real symbol, a real bastion of that sort of cross-pollination between art and fashion. And I think that a designer like Jonathan, he kind of is a symbol of that as well. Why is that happening so much at the moment? We talked about this a bit on the Mark by Mark panel, but
well, you know, the ICA has always had a history of, you know, engaging with culture on a wider level, and you know, I guess fashion has become such a kind of key part of people's lives. You know, the amount of magazines or the amount of advertising, the way that we just engage with this. I mean, I mentioned before that, you know, obviously now with the internet and everything, you know, there's this kind of constant looking at the self, or looking at how one appears, or through the language of, you know, selfies and social media and everything. So yeah, you know, I guess it's just tapping into what is current, because that's the ICA's remit, is to engage with what is going on out there, and trying to be as kind of receptive to that, and you know, a fleet of foot as it possibly can, you know, and it's important to the ICA. I mean, you know, we've done a few shows, and I mentioned before, you know, Bernadette Corporation and Jürgen, and did the Ibiza show, which was a lot of fun, with Idea Books, and you know, we have a Vivienne Sassan show coming up next year, but that, you know, we're not so much looking at her fashion photography, we're looking at another body of work. So but it has to be aware, because, you know, people do look at fashion, and we can't just strictly look at the art world.
And the image is symbiotic, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think more and more the students have a sense of responsibility now. So they're interested in what they want their clothes to say, and the kind of world they'll be operating in. And it certainly is interesting. And by the way, happy birthday to the London Fashion Week. 30 years this year they've been going. And if you look at the influence of fashion, there were people there today and yesterday, in fact. It's nature on show, then it's organic beauty. Art is always there, but what I felt very much was there's a kind of peppering of cross-cultural references. It's certainly more diverse than it's ever been, and the interest in art is because it's got to be fit to function as well, so that the textures, tactile, the actual colour, painterly. Some people have got it in a delicate way, other people are being incredibly mischievous with hard edge on a soft fabric. It is quite interesting, because it's making you think about the creativity involved.
It's the composition, you know, looking at materials, and obviously colour and how you put that together. You know, you can be inspired from, you know, a lot of contemporary art, or the shapes and forms that you know, that designers take on board, and you know, it's I guess natural to, you know, respond to the world around you. So.
And Nick's got downstairs in the foyer here the Gaga shoes.
Yeah,
well, they look
Narita's
beautiful, you know, framed. They're the prototypes, or beautifully multifaceted work there. It's reflective, it's heelless. This is a concept, but it's fashion.
It's interesting you say concept when we were talking, especially what you were just saying there, Matt, because I think that's one thing that I find really interesting about about Jonathan, is how he works, and it's embarrassing, J-Dubs, is how he works kind of, I think he works as much as an image maker as a designer, and it goes back to what you were saying, Stephen, about branding, because even just in the way he designed his collections, he definitely thinks about how they're going to look like online, and he's always, even just kind of the way he's very meticulous in what he posts online, even just on things like Instagram, and I want to talk a bit about that branding, and also about the way he operates in this kind of image maker role, and also because that wonderful book he did with Loewe, which you must have seen, that M in Paris did the design.
But I think
it's so interesting.
This wave of young designers now, you can't just leave college and be a great designer. You have to know the great, you have to know the art director, you have to know the best young photographers, you have to have a very strong vision about your brand, and that's what's great about Jonathan, is that's what's happening now with him.
He really understands that.
I can see a store, I can see it just leads itself on.
Yeah, you know exactly
on.
what his
I
aesthetic
know what his
would be.
5-year plan is, you can tell.
Yeah.
It's not just making clothes and selling them online and stuff, it's quite important to him.
If you go back many years though, and you think of some musicians who recognised a good director, birth of MTV, it's getting your voice heard in a world that's really very, very sophisticated now in messaging, isn't it? And it's always better to collaborate it's quite lonely. I mean, I think Jonathan's given interviews about in the studio and the way that he likes it to be more of a kind of catalyst coming in.
Do we worry ever with that focus on branding that sometimes for designers, the ones that succeed are the ones that can sort of shout the loudest rather than the ones that can produce amazing
that's the way that's the way it is. It's always been like that, you know.
It makes me sad though.
Yeah, but it's the process of natural selection. You know, if you go back to the beginning of the 20th century and how fashion was then, you know, Packham, Poiret, Chanel, Dior, all those ones, they were fabulous marketers as well as being great designers. You have to have both. I'd love to know what comment he's making by showing at the Old St Martin's, because he went to London College of Fashion.
Yeah, I think it would probably. I think that's interesting to say that though, because I think there's an element.
I think maybe he didn't get into St
I
Martin's.
think we're a community.
But
I think a lot of
that.
people play this rivalry off. We act as a place to train young creatives. I think what you've said is so true. If you go back, when was Poiret? 1910, and he understood, have a party. How am I going to get them talking about my product? Schiaparelli.
Put bottles of perfume on all the seats, you know. Get close to celebrities.
Juxtaposed to ideas.
It's interesting to say get close to celebrities, because I think that's one thing that I find very, very interesting with Jonathan is a lot of the sort of more branded young designers, that's kind of the avenue they go down, is getting it on people. But you never really see Jonathan's clothes worn by celebrities, and he doesn't seem to engage with that much, which I find really, I don't know if it's just because they are a bit more difficult.
Refreshing.
Yeah.
How great, maybe he's just not interested.
Yeah.
Maybe he just doesn't think that they're going to wear his clothes very well.
What did you think of the Loewe book? I just want to ask your opinion on it, because you worked with, did you see the one he did with You've not seen it? I'll show you. It's fabulous. Because they gave it out to us at the Loewe presentation, and then
I heard a lot about it.
Yeah, and then 2 weeks later, Idea Books are already selling it. It's absolutely beautiful, and I just thought it was really interesting to kind of work with an object that much. What did you think of it, Andy?
I mean,
everyone was kind of fun fighting to get them.
No, I mean, we fought to get 3 copies and ran out with them because we knew it was
another
be
journalist stole mine. I was actually very angry.
It's just very well done.
Who?
Max Permain.
Oh dear.
Yes.
But, you know,
well, I gave it to him for safekeeping, and he never gave it back. Sorry, Max.
So what was it that stood out for you in that?
I just thought it was really interesting to work in that way, because you were walking around Paris and there were these amazing adverts, sort of very publicly, and then to do an object that's so personal that you could just sort of take away, and it was so limited edition and must have cost an absolute fortune to do. It just seemed a very old school thing to do in some ways, but also it was so kind of meticulously done. I think he was kind of setting himself, there was an arrogance to it which I kind of loved, because it was like, this book is going to be really iconic because it's really limited edition, and only a few people are going to get it. So he's really setting himself up to be kind of that this was a real pivotal moment in fashion. And I loved that. I thought it was really great that people will always talk about that book, people will have it, and it'll go into some fashion archives, and people will be like, oh, what was that from? It'll be Jonathan Ander's first collection at Loewe. I think there's an interesting thing to that.
But also to have the balls to redesign the logo and get to do the logo, that's quite a brave thing to do, because it's quite a sensitive thing to destroy something that's the DNA of a brand and stuff. I think that was a really great idea.
But then it was interesting, because then the collection, I don't want to talk too much about Loewe, but I'm just very excited about it. The collection I thought was that he looked a lot back through the archive, and there was a lot of focus on modernising existing design rather than kind of
he looked at Spanish history, but not in a literal way, about more clothes, at what fishermen wore and stuff, but kind of great, none of that like historical rape rubbish, like something quite genuine.
But it must be so refreshing for him to have a new challenge as well, because to be invested in as a new designer, and he's obviously established, and he is the one that we think is going to last. I mean, without a doubt, his understanding.
He will last.
He's got a huge talent. To have a collaboration that involves you looking and referencing in a different way is so wonderfully kind of taking an opportunity that you haven't taken. And I think that, my goodness, Spain, it needs some help. And Picasso, where's his references going to go? I mean, it's lovely to see that kind of exciting opportunity happening. I'm not saying that if you stay in Britain and you work still in the East End, it's not going to happen. But more and more, I think that we have to recognise that you've got to offer up the seeding to see how someone can reframe something. Why not?
And let's talk a little bit about kind of, we've talked about that cash injection. It was interesting that you just said then, Stephen, the label will last, because it's been a while since that happened, and we've seen a few shows now, and I think people have definitely spoken about how everything feels more polished. Are we seeing that in this collection? We've talked that it feels slightly more commercial, maybe just because the shapes are slightly less challenging than we'd expect for him. But do you look at this and think that it feels a lot more like a luxury house now rather than a young designer?
Yes, for me it does, definitely.
And what is it? Is it the fabrications, or is it just the silhouettes? What marks this apart?
I think there's a confidence there that any woman could wear that, and I think in the past you actually had to buy into the cool a bit, and I'm not saying that that didn't suit a kind of cutting edge character. I think with this, if it actually fitted your body, you could sashay along in a way that made it interesting to look at what you're wearing, because the ripples down it and the way there's a fluidity there in the construct would without a doubt cause conversation from both sexes. It's a very fine looking garment. He's got it.
And you know, it's all about perception. I think, you know, when he's creating a new collection, of course, he'll have an idea and a reference and pattern cutters, but also he'll be thinking, how is this going to be perceived by the bigwigs at LVMH? How is it going to be perceived in relation to Loewe? And that'll be a really guiding part of his design. And yes, I agree, when a designer goes to a big house, it is wonderful and exciting. It's also completely terrifying.
Yeah, terrifying.
I bet.
And it's not
because,
something that all
you know,
designers
this
should
is the big time. It's all worked. Wow. He's one of the very, very few that, of all those thousands of fashion students coming out, and it's actually worked for him. And, you know, as RuPaul says, he doesn't want to fuck it up.
But it's interesting also, because that's kind of, it goes back to when I said, like, why him? Why is he so great? Because if you think about London, sometimes I do think, why Jonathan Anderson? Why not Jonathan Saunders? Why not America Chancy or Roxanne Illinchet? And not to imply that they've all been sort of financed in different ways and have had sort of investment from lots of different people, but you think, why him? And I guess that's what I'm really interested in.
Because he was at the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. And, you know, that's also the luck of fashion, but you make your own luck as well.
Do you think it was a bit of, we've got Christopher Kane, we'll take Jonathan Anderson? Do you think there was a bit
I
of
think
that?
he sold himself through conversation as well. I think he sparkles, he's got a real passion, he understands the process, which is very important, because I think if you're a known brand and you're putting money into someone, you don't want here today, gone tomorrow. You don't want ego. I think he's got a fine sense of what I would call diligent craftsmanship there.
You said yes then quite firmly when we were talking about kind of being a good spokesperson. How about you?
I mean, yeah, he's very, very, very intelligent. He's very clever. I mean, I worked with him early on his menswear and stuff, and he had a very strong idea about what he wanted, but also he knew the people he needed to draw in to get to the next level, which is often a problem with young designers. They don't know enough of what's going on around them. They're so isolated and in their own world, and he knew exactly what he needed and who he needed and how he could draw them in, and that's his talent, I think, as well. It's not just being a pattern cutter or a designer, or I think he just draws people in very cleverly.
I don't think he should be fearful of a tradition either. I mean, those shoes look like shoes. A lot of what I saw yesterday, there's some amazing kind of pointed, extreme, could almost be pillars that you're putting on your feet. We are into a future vision. It could be scientific, it could be metaphysical. He's actually quite classical in some of the contours here.
Well, I think it's interesting what he's making his signatures as well. I was just thinking quite a lot about the corset, because we've seen so many go by, and if you think, you know, that's such a traditional item, and I feel like that's really a Jonathan signature, both for his women and his men's. Even just, you know, the jumpers he's done that sort of are sewn in with a seam to make a corset that he did for men and women, and then you've seen it a lot when he's done the kind of the strapless things for men, and you think that's it's an odd signature for such a young designer with such a conceptual vision, that you think, you know, a corset, a very traditional item, is their signature. And it's very interesting, because I feel like this collection ties together a lot of the the very European aesthetics that he's done with the Japanese stuff, like the folding and the origami that we're seeing.
And when you know what you're doing, you know how to drape, you know how to tailor, you know how to get the best out of a particular fabric, whether it's metallic or a soft, new. I mean, this is really what is fashion. It's about making you desire something. It's buying into some kind of a dream, and it's also should suit you so that you're happy and comfortable in the way you want to express yourself. And it seems to me he's really coming to terms with 21st century life. I mean, let's face it, if there's a terrorist attack tomorrow, you would be all right in one of those outfits. Yeah, I mean, if you're
That wasn't my first thought.
No. But,
Oh yeah, that bomb-proof leather skirt.
couture also has to take its place if we're all hiding, and unfortunately we are in the middle of something we weren't expected. To me, he's actually giving a little bit of a reality to the world here.
That's interesting, the notion of reality.
Now, you know, I'm not to be quoted on that because that's a flippant way of saying things.
That's between
But,
us.
you know,
But it's out there.
Not that it's
we're
live,
all
right?
queuing together, and this is part of 21st century life.
One thing I want to get all of you guys' opinion on, because I was talking to Nick about this when we did the Tom Brown panel actually, and no one gave a satisfactory response, because I think it's kind of no one's quite sure, so I want to get all of your opinion, which is why there are so many great designers that come from a menswear background that really, really excel across the board, because Jonathan comes from a menswear background, he studied menswear, started his label doing menswear, and we were talking on the Tom Brown panel also about, you know, Raf Simons is another really obvious example. Is there anything in the training of menswear designers that you're nodding?
Totally.
Okay.
Well, it's all about the tailoring.
Yeah.
It's all about constructing a shape which is then applied to a body, and it implies a certain sort of construction and form, but then you can loosen that up. If you're going the other way and you start off draping and making a very soft form, it's quite difficult to go the other way.
So should we train our womenswear students more like our menswear students?
Well, I think that they have to have they have to be able to do both, and successful designers actually do both. They do what in France they call the flou, which is the recipe, and the tailleur, the tailoring. But yeah, I mean, I think it's quite a phenomenon of the day that people are coming from menswear.
Yeah, I do
menswear
wonder if it's
background.
going to make students kind of, because I think everyone talks about how London Collections Men has made more students want to get into menswear, but I actually don't think it's just that. I think also people are looking at people that have come out of menswear courses and have really taken over fashion and done incredibly well.
But you know, I mean, this is one thing that Jonathan did do, certainly at the beginning, was what's menswear, what's womenswear. Exhibit number 1, these shoes, can you see? You know, these are Raf shoes, but you know, why are they men's shoes? Why could they not be women's shoes?
Yeah.
You know, they're decorative, they're fun. I mean, those, yes, and the brocade. But you know, those ideas, traditional ideas of what's suitable for a man, suitable for a woman, are sort of crazy that they still exist now, 30 years after Gautier and lots of other people tried to change them.
Then I always ask this on the panel, everyone kind of looks bewildered, but then why aren't we seeing designers show, because we are seeing it more and more, and then all the menswear press get really annoyed and they're like, oh, why are there always women on the menswear runways? But why aren't we seeing designers show men's and women's together?
Well, we are when you look at the student work.
Yeah.
And I think part of the buy-in is because of the manatee market.
Yeah.
So the men's grooming and the men's fashion in a kind of post-austerity, although I think we're still in it, it has actually boomed more. I think you are finding it more and more. The courses are specific because for the, as Stephen said, there's the traditional in the tailoring, but when it comes to showing your show, you are seeing, I suppose some people have been describing it as girlitude. It is about an attitude. So this is the wearer, this will be my consumer. I don't care if it's male or female, these shoes are going to work because they're great shoes.
But I think when it's shown on a high fashion runway, we see men on a women's runway or women on a men's runway purely for commercial things. It's to flog your resort collection or pre-fall or whatever. And we, as we said, we still see the courses split up. You study menswear, you study womenswear, and I think given all successful designers end up turning their hand to both pretty much, why aren't we seeing more courses that are just in design?
you'll be seeing more courses that are accommodating the psychology behind design. Because in the same way as they're saying, what fragrance do you want? What's in your DNA? Are you a kind of experimental? Are you punk? Are you promiscuous? Are you... I think what you'll see, it's not necessarily how you mark up your course, it's what you understand fashion and the designing area to be. Because you've got to learn your craft and you've got to learn the process of good artisanship. Into the courses more and more is the politics of fashion and issues of sustainability and all the areas of responsibility. So I think it's higher education that's in an evolution as well. I don't think, you know, they're not going to be stuck in if it's not working for a intergenerational, more diverse world.
What's your take, Angie? You're smiling.
On the men's and women's wear mixed together, I actually hate men's and women's shows when it's a mix. When I go to Milan and there's women's wear in the show, it really annoys me.
Why does it annoy you?
I go to see the men's collections, I don't go to see the women's collections. It's not that I don't have an interest in the women's wear, it's just that I want to see it at a different time.
Why though?
Why?
I think because my head's just there to concentrate on menswear, and I think it distracts from what we're looking at.
But do you not think we'll get to a point where, you know, we've kind of already said it, there's so many labels that have sprung out of the phenomenon of women wearing men's clothes? Are we not going to get to a point where clothing gets pretty much unisex?
I mean, I think
that's so sad. I think that sounds so sad. I mean, I think women I want my own clothes.
But you're into tomboyish and the blur is there in a world where there's very few straight lines
now. A choice. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I mean there are. That's true, but I think we still want some. We still need categories from which to depart and have a perspective on, and then reflect on and shift. And you know, I don't know if we're quite there yet, and I'm not sure. Like actually, even when I was thinking about Jonathan's clothes and whether I don't really think androgyny is the right word. They complicate the kind of codes of like sexuality and gender, but they're not androgynous.
You're completely right.
And that's much more interesting to me. And I don't.
It's a confusing time, but I don't mind if it's a bit rough at the moment, in as much as we're not there yet. And I think that there's a lot of students doing, you know, they've been culturally studying gender. We're in the transactional time of it, and it possibly will blur even further. If you're sitting there and it, you know, upsets the line of thought, I think what I think has to happen is a layering, like we do on the net. You know, you're seeing things simultaneously.
However, within fashion, the whole position of masculinity and the position of femininity is one of the things that fashion designers play on. It's one of the tools of the trade. And if you have both within one show, what it does, in a weird way, it diffuses the message. Maybe this is what you're talking about. Because, you know, for example, there are outfits which are slightly more masculine or slightly more feminine within this show. If you had a whole series of menswear going along the same thing, those points of view are going to become less evident, really. You know, so often fashion is about sealing out the outside world in order so you can focus on the clothes. That's why he's showing in a plain white space, because otherwise he'd be showing in the middle of Piccadilly Circus with everything going on. Maybe one year he'll do that, I don't know. But this way it makes you focus on the clothes. If you had men going along in there too, it would just be a sort of a diversion almost. Even though that, for example, like Miu Miu did mix shows, and Mark by Mark used to do mix shows too. Now they've stopped it, but.
No, that's really interesting. I think it's interesting as well when you tie that into what Lucy was saying about this, because I think he's always given this androgynous tag, and you're totally right. I think that's kind of lazy reporting because it's not androgyny, but I think to me the biggest takeaway from all of his collections, they are talking about gender, aren't they? And I think you need it. yeah, there is something about it just being women in there that lets you ponder that a bit more. Mm-hmm. What does this collection say about how he's thinking about women and what he's saying about femininity?
Pure. There's a confidence, and I don't think there's anything that's fake in any of that. For me, it's if you find me attractive, I'm here for you. With the hat, I don't know why this is reminding me of fabulous Mediterranean sun hats. I don't know, maybe it's because I've got kind of similar floppy thing. I think it's very, very attractive, that shape. Gone are the nun's habits. This is a softer, more classic. I love it.
It's interesting as well, sorry.
Well, I just want to say about the hat, I'm not sure if it's a perfect circle, but you know, it's a Bauhaus perfect geometrical form. So I think that's at its point of creation is that. Then it drops and falls into this shape which is more poetic, but it's its base, it's as technical as the dress which it's being worn with.
The other thing is that it hides the wearer's face, which is kind of has an element of power associated with it. You know, if you're wearing, I've worn a hat with a really wide brim, and you can avert your eyes from anyone looking at you, and that's kind of pretty powerful. So I think they'd be fun to wear.
Well, it's interesting because we've just been doing this shoot at the moment about bonnets, which Nick has just done with wonderful Amanda Harlick, and lots of different designers made bonnets for us. Jonathan being one of them, and Sarah Burton and Riccardo Tisci, and they're all fantastic. But one of the things that we all got totally obsessed with about bonnets was this idea of concentrating the viewer on the wearer's face. So, for example, you know, you do kind of focus really directly on her face, and it streamlines your vision, but also how she's blocking out the world, and it's kind of you're drawing attention to yourself, but you're also protecting yourself, and lots of those kind of dual roles I think are quite interesting, especially in the context of a Jonathan collection, where it's kind of about being discreet but also showing off, about being sensual but also about being standoffish, and I think that's a really nice summary of how he works as a designer.
The veiled body.
The veiled body, indeed.
I think it's interesting that people wear hats sometimes to be anonymous, but in fact what it does is make you look again, and this fabulous kind of potential for a hat. When you're designing hats, do you actually look at a face as a kind of core structure, because our faces are so different? Where's your starting point for how fleshy, how do you actually kick it all off?
How the person wants to feel when they're wearing it.
So have you got an imagined consumer in mind, or you know always who it is?
No, I try not to have an imagined consumer in mind. Then I will make hats specifically for that person. For me, what's interesting is the diversity. But there's like this sort of ephemeral idea. I mean, yes, I could have a muse of what you're talking about, or a physicality, but I prefer just to do it in my head, really.
And when you see how the person feels when they're wearing it, how do you think the Jonathan Anderson woman wants to feel for Spring Summer 15?
About this sort of hat in particular, you know, it's interesting, the hiding and the revealing thing, and I love the idea that it's sort of based on a Riviera beach hat, because essentially that's what it's ending up looking, and it's got that sort of slight piquancy of, you know, 30s Parisian, 30s French photographs in it. How is a woman going to feel when she's wearing that? Well, she's probably going to not get sunburned, which is probably a good idea, and you know, she'll feel like a star.
Oh, that's nice. Feel like a star. That's a nice note to end chat on. Thanks so much, guys. Should we give him a clap to round things up?
Let him stay in the constellation.